here, take a seat. Should be okay. So, good morning, United States. Good afternoon, Europe, and wherever else you are in the world. My name is Carsten Schradin. I'm at the moment in South Africa at the Succulent Karoo Research Station, but I'm a director of research at the CNRS in Strasbourg, France, and it's my privilege to be the host of today's FIND seminar. But before I come to today's seminar, I first want to apologize. I had some technical problems today or this week with sending the final announcement. The reason is last term, the CNRS decided that people who send several hundred emails a day are spammers and get blocked from the email system. So the last year I got blocked by employer. So today or this week I used another email from Gmail, which went through to many people, but not to everyone. So some of you might have got 1 or 2 or 3 announcements, and the ones who are not here probably got none. I will have to see how to solve this issue in the future, but I apologize for that. Now, last week we had a great talk by Conor Fielsen on the evolution of social position structure, multi-level selection perspective. Extremely interesting talk for me. And I also would like to look forward to what's coming up next week. That is Dominik Deffner from Germany, talking about social decision-making in unconstrained human collectives. But today's talk is by Elise Huchard, a colleague of mine from the CNRS. Elise is at the CNRS in Montpellier, where she also did her PhD on aspects also of human and primate behavior before she went to Göttingen and worked together with Peter Kappeler as a postdoc in Madagascar on mouse lemurs. From there, she went to do a postdoc in Cambridge together with Tim Clattenbrock on meerkats. It's also where she published her first Nature paper, or interesting study where she shows that how to put this in words, when you feed a meerkat a lot of food, its direct competitors also find more food in the environment to have the same level of growth. So your competitors growing and makes the other individuals grow too. In all, Elise worked a lot on the interactions between female and male life histories and also conflict between males and females. She's published more than 80 papers, a lot of them in the proceedings of the Royal Society of London. But she also has this one Nature paper, and she has a second very interesting science paper that was on male infanticide. And she's, like you see here, very much interested in using data from individual-based long-term studies, one of which here in Namibia, at the end of the Namib Desert, she's a co-PI, and to answer questions about male and female life history and reproductive strategies. And she's going to tell us all about it now, or not all about it, but the most interesting things that she knows about it in her talk on the evolution of power asymmetries between the sexes in primates. And I'm looking very much forward to your talk, Elise.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Shall I share my screen now then?
Yes, please.
So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Thank you everyone for listening. It's a real honor and I am to be here today. I mean, like I'm very, very happy to have a chance to share my research with you today. Actually, I mean, I would love to join more frequently, but like it's in the French time zone, it's like children's school pickup time for me. So it's not the most convenient time, but I think it's a great initiative, and I really like the opportunity to discuss in one-to-one meetings before as well. So, okay, so today I'm going to talk about the ecology of sexual coercion and of male-female power asymmetries in primates. And instead of giving you a very conceptual introduction, then I opted to tell you a bit more about my scientific trajectory and how I ended up asking those questions actually, and where my starting point, because I think it's a bit more lively. And also, I think it's a good example for students and young scientists to see how researchers come to ask one question, then another one, etc. And also it reflects the evolution of the broader field of inquiry more generally. So I think it's interesting. So when I prepared this talk, I got back to the start. That is when I prepared my PhD viva about 15 years ago. And I dug this slide out, which was the first slide of my PhD defense. And at this point, I mean, the field of sexual selection was very oriented towards showing that females actually are not passive in the sexual selection process, but rather choosy. And like a big question then was to find out the targets of their choice. And so I think it was all inspired from great research from ornithologists who allowed us to understand so much about patterns of ornamentation across the bird kingdom and the animal kingdom more generally. And so I set out for myself, I had secured this PhD on the baboon system, and I set out to understand what baboon females actually wanted when it came to males. And I specifically wanted to test the importance of their immune genes, because it was like there was a big fuss at the time about MHC genes of the major histocompatibility complex, and how one partner can choose a partner that has either complementary genes compared to its own genes, or perhaps the best genes. And answering those questions was quite a challenge, because it meant like a huge amount of fieldwork on one hand to document like the male choice by the female baboons, but also like a huge amount of lab work to genotype these MHC genes, like before like all these fancy next generation genotyping tools. So I mean, like I was young and enthusiastic, so I took this long flight to meet my study subjects in Namibia. Which were two large groups of Chacma baboons at Saubis Nature Park, which is really on the edge of the Namib Desert in the pro-Namib area, which is a very arid savanna and very mountainous as well, very rocky. And like for me, like it was love at first sight with the site, because it's like really this wilderness, it's amazing beauty, and as much as like with the baboons, because like this encounter with like wild baboons was like really totally life-changing. And I think that's also the reason why I'm now the co-director of Saubis alongside Guy, because I've done quite a few other things in between, as Karsten told you, and as I'm going to tell you a tiny bit more about. But then I always came back to the baboons, because like I think it's just like they're just so fun to study in the field. And so now I'm co-directing Saubis alongside Guy, my PhD advisor, who also founded it, the field site, and Elise Huchard, who probably some of you know, who's at University College London. And so, but the Saubis is like a very classical long-term ecological field site, monitoring the demography and the ecology and the life history and behavior of like this wild baboon population. It started in 2000, but I think we've got now monitoring on the two same groups since 2005. So it's been nearly 20 years that we are monitoring the two same study groups, which are at the moment about 85 individuals in one and 70 in another. And they're like really fully habituated to human presence, like, sometimes a bit too much actually. And like when I first arrived there at first sight, like coming from like having read like all these sexual selection textbooks, I thought that baboons seemed to fit quite well the classical mainstream theories in sexual selection, with these highly competitive males that could fight to death to access like fertile females. So they live in this large multi-male, multi-female groups where males, as females, like mate with several sexual partners. They also have this like linear social hierarchies with like a number 1, 2, 3 extra for males and also for females. And males actually fight to become dominant, and like the alpha male monopolizes most mating opportunities. Whereas like on the female side, females like inherit their rank from their mother, and they're generally capable of raising their offspring without much help, even if like males do provide a bit of paternal care. But like what is really, when it comes to sexual behavior from the females, like what's really salient is like how perceptive they can be. And so like a female who's not monopolized by a male will go from one mating to the next, and literally as she's still mating, she's like already expressing like this come here face to the next male, and will solicit these matings quite actively, which has often been interpreted as an expression of their preferences, and like the fact that they get like a really decent amount of kind of sexual freedom when coming to mate and choosing their mates. But then, like after spending like 1,000 hours to follow these like big these fertile females who have like these big swellings when they're coming to when they're coming close to ovulation. If you see my arrow, you see an example. These signals are indicators of fertility. And so I spent hours following them. Like then I spent hours in the lab genotyping them to test whether they might prefer partners with like different genes or particular genes, perhaps like high-ranking partners, and I found nothing at all. So basically, couldn't find any sign of like female preference, which was like fairly frustrating after all this work. And actually, I mean, so I really needed to reflect on those negative results, as like we always need to do when it happens. And like, so in those reflections, I was just thinking, well, actually, I mean, perhaps it was not the best choice to start with, like to study like female choice in baboons, because, well, first of all, like there are a number of points retrospectively which look like they're not that well in line with like predictions of sexual selection. So first of all, I mean, like if females really are the choosy sex, then I mean, why do they exhibit those striking sexual ornaments that I've presented? I mean, like in principle, it's the chosen sex who bears ornaments and not the choosy sex. So perhaps it was not that clever of mine to choose that topic. And then in addition, I mean, like for having followed them quite a lot, and I mean, it was not like a big scientific discovery, but like a female, when they come close to ovulation, they're closely mate guarded by like usually a high-ranking male who prevents them from mating with like anyone else than him. Meaning that, I mean, like it's not necessarily the best context to express like mating preferences, some sort of mate choice. And then finally, I mean, like I had observed like on regular occurrences like this frequent physical attacks from adult males to females, which often appeared like sudden and unprovoked with no obvious reason. And I really wondered like why are males like so aggressive to females? And so, well, just to give you an idea of like what it might look like, because I think it's always useful to have an idea what we're talking about when we work in so different systems. So there's this little video, like it was the BBC came to Saubis to film the baboons like 2 years ago, and like for their planet Earth 3, and they nicely shared some bits of footages with us. So you can see like 2 adult females who start like a peaceful grooming session, and then on top of the screen you can see like a young, like a subadult male who looks like he comes to mess up a bit. So disrupting the grooming session, starting to chase one of the female. Then you can see that like another male comes to bring some coalitionary support to the 2 females that were attacked. So it's a very typical video. There's really nothing exceptional to this video for anyone like acquainted with like baboons. But I think it just gives an idea of how it can look like for anyone not acquainted to baboons. What kind of, how interaction can be aggressive or violent. So here we see the female is trying to drink like on a small thing, and she's also screaming in fear. And like that's still the young male from the beginning who keeps on escalating and keeps on. And he will aggress one of the female, and like that's I think in this case, the female managed to push him back because they've got this support from another male. But that also gives you an idea what it can look like when they just attack a female. That's the kind of thing that you can see regularly, even outside the context of a fight. And then he's chased by the other male. Okay, so I think that's essentially what I wanted to show you. And so as I was writing my thesis discussion about like these negative results and trying to find like a clever interpretation for them, I came across like really pioneering work from on chimpanzees by the Martin Muller group in the States that was showing for the first time evidence for sexual intimidation in the chimps. And for me, like it was really immediately, I hooked up to it and I thought it was really groundbreaking. And I really thought that it could explain really quite a bit of the unexplained aspects of the system I had witnessed at Soubise. And I immediately decided I'd soon be back at Soubise to test this hypothesis and try to see whether baboons like do sexual intimidation as the chimps do, which could explain why they can be so violent with the females on regular occasions. But meanwhile, it was like time for me to start a postdoc. And so I moved to Germany, to Göttingen, to work in Peter Kapler's group on the mouse lemurs, because I thought, well, when trying to come up with an idea for my next research, I was just like, well, I mean, I've tried to study female choice, like in a species where males are extremely socially dominant over females and where obviously females don't choose that much. So perhaps for my postdoc, I'll try a system where I've got a few more chances to find evidence for female mate choice. And lemurs might be a good candidate system because they have these females being socially dominant over males. And also, I mean, they're very olfactory driven. So it was interesting for the immune genes thing. And well, bet what, actually, yes, I did find evidence for female choice for partners with like complementary immune genes. So it was great. I was very happy with that. And it really was a wonderful opportunity to get to learn like another society, the solitary nocturnal lemurs, like another type of male-female interactions that will be precious for the rest of my questions. Then I moved on to Cambridge to work on female-female competition in the Kalahari meerkats, which was yet another type of mammalian societies. They have these cooperative breeding societies with like these monogamous relationships, and where social dominance obviously doesn't seem to be particularly biased towards one sex. And I think, again, this really, I was studying female-female competition there, but this really allowed me to gain experience on this range of societies and mating systems, and really stimulated my curiosity regarding like what drives sex biases in social power and dominance, and how does it come that male and female can have so different social and with sexual relationships, and how does it link with like patterns of sexual conflict. And so with that in mind, today I first want to tell you a bit about the ecology of sexual coercion and what happened when I went back to the baboons to actually test my sexual coercion hypothesis. And then second, I want to broaden it to talk on the ecology and evolution of male-female power relationships more generally. So like, again, male-female power when it comes to social relationships and not just sexual relationships. So first of all, what is sexual coercion? It's been defined as the use of force or the threat of force by a male to incite a female to mate with him, and that's like direct coercion, or alternatively to discourage her to mate with rivals, and that's indirect coercion. There are different forms of sexual coercion that have been observed in the mammals. There's obviously like the most obvious and probably basic one, which is forced copulation, where a male like physically restrains like a female to mate with her. And that's not so common actually in mammals, actually rather uncommon, but that's like regularly observed like in bottlenose dolphins or in orangutans. And then there's sexual harassment, which is actually when male aggression is immediately followed by copulation. So it's basically when, for a female, the costs of resisting a mating are higher than the cost of mating itself. So actually they give up and they mate. And this has been commonly observed in ungulates or in some pinniped systems as well. And there's coercive mate guarding. So I think I've already described what mate guarding can look like in the Chacma baboons, but like in some species, it's like in Chacma baboons, it doesn't necessarily look very coercive at first sight. Quite often the male is just following the female. In some system, it's very coercive, like in Hamadryas baboons, like as soon as the female leaves the immediate proximity of the male, she can get attacked by the harem leader. So she comes back in his vicinity. And then there's intimidation. I introduced a little bit when talking about chimpanzees, which is the most recently described form of sexual coercion. And there's an obvious reason for that, is that it's not obvious immediately, because it's a pattern where aggression is temporarily decoupled from the mating. So basically, males are very regularly aggressive to females, even if females are not yet fertile. And when it comes to when they become fertile, then this aggression that they've directed towards female for extended periods seems to pay off by increasing the male chances to mate with a female. And so it's hard to detect because of this temporal decorrelation between mating and aggression. So how can we study sexual coercion in the field scientifically? There's Barbara Smuts provided this wonderful introduction to sexual coercion, very clear and helpful. And I think she really delineated a very useful framework to study it. And she outlined 3 predictions. First, to provide evidence for sexual coercion. So first of all, male aggression should target fertile females rather than non-fertile females, because obviously if it's directed to non-fertile females, it can be linked with food or something else than reproduction. Second, male aggression is costly for females, meaning that it's not like a form of courtship, for example, where males would demonstrate their physical strength or something like that. It's really something that bears costs to females. And third, male aggression has a function, and this function is to increase their mating success. And this prediction is very much a dyadic prediction. It works in dyads, so it works between one particular male and one particular female. It's not necessarily the most aggressive males like mating with most females. It really predicts that one particular male, when it's aggressive to one particular female, will increase its chance to mate with this particular female. So then I was joined by Elise, who is here today. So hello, Elise. I hope I will do justice to your results. Who was my first PhD student, and we together decided to test this hypothesis at Soubise, and we gathered all the data from my PhD and her data as well to test these predictions. And so first, the first prediction, we found out that indeed, male aggression is much more frequent on those females that are either in estrus, near ovulation with this swelling, or those females that are just between 2 swelling periods and who will be in estrus soon, than towards pregnant or lactating females. Second, we found that male aggression is actually costly for females, especially when it comes to injuries, and that those females that are fertile or close to be fertile gets much more injuries than those females that are pregnant or lactating. And there's I put this really nasty picture because it was very obvious with this female, each time she was the wound was opened by the male who was constantly harassing her. And as soon as she would come out of her fertility period, the wound would start to heal progressively. And then she would be fertile again for the next menstrual cycle. And then the male would reopen this wound, this injury. And it did that on 3 consecutive cycles. It was really horrible. So it gives you an example of what it can look like. And finally, we measured the rate of male aggression towards particular females in the 2-3 weeks preceding ovulation. and tried to test whether that rate of aggression predicts the male chance to mate with the female, like when she really is close to ovulation in the few days around ovulation. And we found that, yeah, actually, indeed, those dyads where the female had been the victim of lots of aggression by the male, they had much more chances to be observed in mate guarding. And so I think it was really interesting results. And then, like, when discussing them more broadly in our group, like especially with Marie Charpentier, who is like one of my closest colleague and friend, like who works on the wild mandrills in Gabon, but we in the same team in Montpellier. Marie was saying, yeah, I mean, like I mean, it's really interesting results, but like, I mean, you know, I can't believe it's like that in the mandrills. I think it's really only in some species and populations. And in the mandrills, I mean, they're like your Chacma baboons, we know they're like super mean and nasty, but like my mandrills, they're much more pacific and much nicer to the females. And they usually, I mean, rarely have this really big aggression that you describe. So I can imagine that happens. And then I'm just like, yeah, but like, I mean, like people have studied Chacma baboons for decades before realizing that was the case. So it might be worth testing. And then we had like Nikos, who came out, Nikos Smith, who is here as well. Hi, Nikos, who started his PhD with us to test these same predictions in the mandrills. And so, I mean, Marie has this wonderful project Mandrillus running in Gabon. She generously shared like 8 years of her behavioral data. She's studying this big group of mandrills with like, at the time, about 200 mandrills, but now over 300 mandrills. Really fascinating system. And we obviously tested the same predictions. And like so when it came to the first prediction, we similarly found that swollen females like get more aggression than other females, although it's like a bit less pronounced than in baboons, but it's clearly there. And when it comes to injury, I mean, the pattern is very clear. And we have to, like, it's a forested system where it's much harder the behaviors are less visible than in the Chacma baboons living in the desert. So probably some of the aggression is underestimated by the injuries you see them. So that probably explains like why this is more striking. And then like similarly, when there was like much aggression exchange within a certain dyad, that increased the chance of this dyad being observed mating when the female was swollen. So very similar results. And well, then Nikos wanted to push a bit these results, like not just replicating what we had seen, but like going a bit further to understand like factors that can modulate the importance, the intensity, the frequency of sexual coercion. And so we together started to try to move towards like the ecology of sexual coercion and understanding how it might vary across males, but also, I mean, there's quite nice work on chimps on that, but a bit less to understand like why different females might be differently exposed. And also what like how patterns of social relationship might modulate sexual coercion exposure, for example. And so just to give you examples, because I don't have time to go into details, but one of the questions we had was whether when female are closely associated to one male, so kind of close has one close male associate, like does this male has a protective effect and like will prevent her from sexual coercion from other males? And interestingly, it doesn't at all. It's like so it's the reverse, if anything. So when like the female have like a closer relationship with one male, which is like measured by their grooming, the strength of their grooming bonds, then she's exposed to more coercion from other males, so they don't at all play a role in protecting females. Then we had like a similar question with respect to female-female bonds, something like would females, if they're more socially integrated, if they have like female-female bonds, would they be able to raise like, for example, female-female coalitions to retaliate against these coercive males, and would that help? And actually, similarly, it doesn't help at all. And we found a reverse relationship, like which was a bit surprising, like is like the more socially integrated a female is, and the more coercion she faces from other males. So it's like it's not like I've got a straightforward interpretation to deliver you with. Like we can discuss it further if you want to go back to that. It's like an interesting pattern. And then like at the moment, we're also working now to try to understand more about like how sexual coercion varies across populations, like what are the different forms of sexual coercion that are more frequent in some species and some populations, and like are some species or some populations more exposed to sexual coercion more generally. And we are working on that with Julia Kunz, who initially did her PhD on orangutans in Zurich and sexual coercion in orangutans. And now we are trying to build this like eco-evolutionary landscape of sexual coercion through like meta-analytic methods to identify like key factors, demographic, socio-ecological, or life history factors at play with respect to that. But like it's like no results yet, but coming soon. And so to conclude on this first part, like well, sexual coercion like seems to be a very important constraint on female choice, at least in these primates, group living primate societies that we've studied. I think it's like those evidence of like when females were observed like to solicit matings from males. I mean, like it's very unclear that it's like an expression of their choice in such populations, and it might possibly be appeasement strategies towards coercive males that they show. And it's clear that they don't have as much sexual freedom that we initially thought, even after years of studying them. And I think now we really need to understand a lot about sexual coercion. I think it's really like a field in its infancy, and we need to understand variation across societies, across contexts, across diets, across individuals. Need to understand more about what females can do against it, about the fitness consequences it can have for both males and females, like the extent to which it's important. Now I'm going to move on to my second part, which is about the evolution of male-female power. So first of all, I need to define what intersexual power is. And then I'm going to talk briefly about how we can measure it, and finally try to come to what we currently understand of its evolutionary drivers, with like showing you some really new results on that. So what is intersexual power? So intersexual power measures like asymmetries in resource holding power between males and females, mainly. And by resource holding power, I mean the degree of control that one individual can exert over another when competing over resources and reproductive opportunities. So it's really like a very classical definition of power, of control. I think power can have different dimensions. For example, leadership is a form of power, like the extent to which an individual can weigh on group decisions, but I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm really going to talk only about this degree of control that the extent to which an individual can defend a resource. It can be acquired through different mechanisms, like by coercion. That's really much what we measure with dominance hierarchies, the extent to which individuals can control resources. It can be acquired by leverage mechanisms, and I think in our context that's important when it comes to understand the power that females can get from reproductive control. So in those populations where female can control reproduction, by reproductive control I mean that they can decide when to mate and with whom to mate. So, for example, like in Chacma baboons, females have very low reproductive control. It's really males that have reproductive control. But in those populations where they do have reproductive control, then it gives them reproductive leverage. That means they can use this control as a form of power. Males, basically, if they can't force matings by coercion, then they will have to negotiate access to reproduction and negotiate matings, and that gives a source of power for females. And then like it can be acquired by manipulation as well, probably, like, for example, manipulating information. And in the context of male-female relationships, it might relate to manipulating the fertility of the reliability of fertility indicators, for example. So females, by hiding ovulation or by manipulating fertility signals, can get more reproductive control and more power over males, presumably. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So how can we measure intersexual power? Well, I mean, probably the easiest way and the most classical way is simply to look at sex biases in the outcome of intersexual conflicts. So if I take 100 intersexual conflicts, how often do females win? How often do males win? I think here I probably need to give like a tiny bit of background about the history of the field on female dominance and male dominance. So female dominance, I mean, obviously has been the fact that females can be socially dominant over males, has been first reported in lemurs and in spotted hyenas, and it was like a big surprise, I think, at the time, a bit. And since then, it's long been seen as a binary and fixed attribute of a species. So a species was seen as either female dominant or male dominant. And for quite a while, this view was a bit limiting to understand patterns of intersexual power. And another limitation was the lack of intersexual hierarchies. It's that very often males and females were not thrown together in the same hierarchy, social hierarchy, just because basically quite often in behavioral ecology, we thought that females like compete for different resources as males and that they can compete according to different mechanisms than males. And so there's no point or there's no really meaning in building intersexual hierarchies. Obviously, I mean, it's been done occasionally. It was not necessarily the most frequent patterns. But so for this reason, I think, I mean, we really lagged behind in terms of understanding power relationship between males and females for a while in this field. Indices of intersexual dominance that can be taken, then it's like either the percentages of males that is dominated by one average female in a group, or the percentage of intersexual conflicts that are won by females. It's actually, I mean, like one of the questions we had was like the extent to which it's comparable. And so we gathered together with like a consortium of colleagues, about 19 colleagues, when we had a workshop on that in 2020 to try to use really standardized methods and data sets to compare these different measures across different species. And obviously we had like a non-random selection of species, like including both like species where males were known to be quite dominant, like chacma baboons or mandrills, species where females were known to be quite dominant, like spotted hyenas or lemurs, and species that were more in between. And we use these standardized methods to measure, well, to compare the measures, which were, we found out that these two measures that I mentioned, like really measure the same thing. They're highly correlated. And then we could draw this very nice continuum, this very nice graph where it is obvious, there are two obvious conclusions from it. The first one being, well, it's not a binary trait, it's a continuous trait. And there are many species that, well, species can lie anywhere on the continuum. And second, I think, interestingly, you can see that some of the species, for example, like each color is one species, and here in gray, you've got vervet monkeys. And so it's like 4 different groups of vervet monkeys. And here in red, you've got red-fronted lemurs, 3 different groups. You've got bonobos, like in this color. And you can see that there can be a fair amount of variation across populations of the same species. So it's potentially a flexible trait. With that in mind, we really have like new tools and new framework to investigate more quantitatively variation in these traits. And so we set out with like these colleagues like Dita, Nikos, Claudia and Peter, to try to retrieve from the literature as many data as we could and see whether it would be possible to do a comparative analysis and understand why intersexual power is biased towards females in some species, towards males in some others. And I mean, we were quite surprised because we found quite a few data. Actually, we found data from like about 266 studies from 117 primate species, which was way more than we expected. We derived 3 measures from the literature. The first one was the percentage of male-female agonistic interactions out of all interactions. So whether like actually male-female interactions were frequent or not in a given species. The second one was really like a measure of female dominance, like the percentage of male-female agonistic interactions that are won by females. And the third one is like a qualitative variable characterizing, again, intersexual dominance. So a species would be strictly female dominant when females win more than 90% of interactions, strictly male dominant when species win more than 90% male-female interactions, and with no strict dominance if it's anywhere in between. And this qualitative variable allowed us to include some of the species for which we had strong qualitative statements, but no quantitative measure, saying that, like, for example, like females never win an interaction in a species. So how does it look like? So first of all, we looked at the percentage of inter versus intrasexual conflict across species. And I think the reason for that is like when undergoing this work, I had quite often comments by, well, quite often. Well, it happened that I had comments from people saying, well, I mean, like males and females, they don't really interact agonistically. It's only like aggression is really either between females or either between males, but not between males and females. So, I mean, it's probably not very important from an evolutionary perspective. And I was just like, what? I mean, that's really not my experience of like agonistic interactions. So probably it varies a lot across systems. And so we wanted really to quantify that. And here we can see that, well, intersexual conflicts are quite frequent. And, on average, they're about like 48% of all conflicts across the species we found. They're like in green, in green on this graph. And the dark blue is male-male and the yellow is female interactions. Second, we then looked at the percentage of intersexual conflicts won by females. And you can see that for the species we had, it's quite widely distributed. There's really an immediate observation that comes to mind is that male dominance is far from ubiquitous. It looks like from this sample, strict male dominance is about as widespread as strict female dominance. And so it really breaks from stereotypes that all stereotypes that could be sometimes retrieved from the literature, where like male dominance is the default pattern and female dominance is kind of an evolutionary accident. And third, we see again very clearly from this graph that intersexual dominance is is flexible. You have like really the breadth of the bar that depicts the across population variation for a given species. So the longer the bar and the most important the variation across population is for a given species. And so linking that, repositioning that in the primate phylogeny, we found, well, there's a moderate phylogenetic signal and showing that, I mean, okay, generally like a species does on average the same as what closely related species do, but like that's really not strict whatsoever, and there can be evolutionary transitions both ways. And then like a very clear evolutionary pattern was known before our study, showing that in old world monkeys, Catarrhine primates, I think, it's mostly males dominating. In lemurs, obviously, as was long known, it's mostly females dominating, but not only. And then in platyrhines, it's their very low sex bias. Then we tested for hypotheses with respect to why female dominance emerges. So the first one is about like the intensity of female competition. So it can be reproductive competition or ecological competition. Second one was about like the extent to which females have reproductive control. So control over when to mate and with whom to mate. That's really a hypothesis about sexual conflicts between the sex and how that can drive male-female power relationship. I think this hypothesis can be a bit complex, but it's like we outlined it as clearly as possible in this recent review paper, if that's of interest. And the third one was about female-female bonds, like hypothesizing that female dominance will emerge more often when females can form bonds with other females and like potentially gain against like males because of these coalitions. And the fourth hypothesis is a hypothesis that has been proposed and that has some empirical traction. It proposes that female dominance emerges as a byproduct of male-male competition. So basically, if sex ratios if male bias, so if there are many males in a group, then these males will fight together. These fights will generate loser males, and these loser males will fall at the very bottom of the hierarchy, meaning that females will passively increase in rank. Today, I'm just going to talk about the three first hypotheses because otherwise it would be too long. And I'm just going to show you some very salient results about this hypothesis, but like we have investigated a bit more than what I will show. So the female competition hypothesis posits that female dominance is common when females are intolerant of other females. So when females like basically don't live in group, so in either solitary or pair living primates. Actually, this hypothesis was very well spotted because you can see that there's no strict male dominance in solitary species or in pair living species. So it's either no strict sex bias or either female dominance. Strict male dominance is only found in group living species. Second, we expect female dominance to emerge if it's because of female competition, where female bodies on canines are as large as those of males. And again, this hypothesis was very well spotted. Female dominance is restricted to those females where those species, where that are monomorphic, both in body size and in canine size. And we can see that as soon as dimorphism increases, then there's no female dominance anymore. No strict female dominance, I mean. And finally, female competition predicts that female dominance is common when females do not share home ranges. And here we can see that indeed it was quite well spotted as well. Those female dominance really is characterized by lower home range overlap between females than straight male dominance or the intermediate condition. So generally, male dominance is more common when females do not share home ranges or when home ranges are less overlapping. So I think like a fairly good support for this hypothesis generally. Then some main predictions of the reproductive control hypothesis propose that female dominance is more common again when sexual dimorphism is low. It's really a hypothesis about the evolution of mating systems, and generally sexual dimorphism is very associated with the evolution of mating systems. But I've already shown you, like basically these two hypotheses make the same prediction with respect to dimorphism, and I've already shown you the results, so I don't show them again. And so the second prediction is that female dominance is common in non-polygynous systems. In usually polygynous system, males have high reproductive control. They can monopolize fertile females. on monopolized females, not just fertile females, for example, all the harem living species. And so we predicted that like in these systems, there will be lots of male dominance. And that's the case. Female dominance is only retrieved in non-polygynous systems. And you can see that like monogamy in particular is a very strong promoter of female dominance. There's no strict male dominance in monogamous species. And finally, we expect, it's not finally, female dominance to be more common when sex ratios are more even. Usually the sex ratios are very female biased, again, in like rather polygynous systems where one male defend access to female groups. Sorry. And then indeed, we found that female dominance like correlates with like groups where sex ratios are rather even compared to groups where sex ratios are much more biased towards females, whether there's many females or one male. And finally, we predicted that female dominance would be particularly common in arboreal species because in arboreal species, usually females have much more reproductive control than in terrestrial species. It's much easier to escape male monopolization in this 3D environment or to go for sneaky matings, for example, than in terrestrial primates. And again, there's quite a strong association. And I think generally our results altogether suggest that terrestriality was a very bad move for females and for female dominance. And you can see that like in terrestrial primates, there's no female dominance and there's like a predominance of male dominance. And so it looks like terrestriality coincided with like a much greater male reproductive control, transitions towards more polygynous systems and less female dominance. Okay, last hypothesis, like it's nearly finished. So it was about the female bones. And so this one is probably more straightforward. So basically the idea is like, if like female dominance emerges in response to females forming close bonds with other females, we expect female dominance to be more common when females are philopatric, where they live their entire life together in groups. And that's actually what we found. We found that female dominance is more common in systems where it's males dispersing mainly, whereas in systems where female disperse, we don't find any female dominance. We also expected that female dominance will be more common when females are highly related together, because that usually promotes like kinship. High levels of kinship between females will promote strong bonds between females, but that hypothesis wasn't supported. And finally, we obviously expected that female dominance is then more common where females form coalitions together. But again, that hypothesis wasn't supported. It's like it's not significant. That's why it's like shaded. And it seems that female dominance is like relatively evenly distributed across species where females form coalitions or not. But generally, this hypothesis was less well supported. So in conclusion of this part, I think intersexual power is a continuous trait and varies across, but also within species. It's not binary, as it's long been looked at. And that really opens lots of new perspectives to study it, because it means that we now need to understand the ecology of male-female power as much as the evolution of male-female power, especially in those species where it varies a lot, which seem to be mainly those species that don't have strict dominance one way or another. Those species that are in the middle tend to be particularly flexible. According to our comparative analysis, the evolution of female dominance seems to be associated with cases where female competition is quite high, and where females have quite high reproductive control compared to males. We couldn't find much support for the role of female bonds in explaining female dominance. And that has been the main hypothesis proposed to explain the contrasts between chimpanzees and bonobos when it comes to male-female power. It doesn't mean that it's not the case in bonobos. It could be that bonobos are like, that it's not like a very general explanation, but like it works like in some of the ape societies. It could also be that female-female bonds in the fact that females are socially dominant and form strong bonds in bonobos is a consequence more than a cause of female dominance. And finally, I think something important that comes out of this analysis is the fact that male power, male dominance seems to rely a lot on physical force, basically. When males are bigger than females, they become dominant, and quite often they use coercion to become dominant, whereas female power, the emergence of female dominance doesn't rely on physical superiority and coercion, relies on alternative pathways that are more linked with reproductive leverage in cases where the physical strength between the two sexes are relatively similar. As a general conclusion, I think all the research on sexual coercion really questions evidence for female choice in some primate societies, and I think that's like an exciting new field of inquiry. Or new field. I mean, it's not that new now anymore, but I think there's still a lot to be done. There's the recent work on intersexual power really sheds new light, I think, on an old question that we, as behavioral ecologists, have struggled to make good progress on for decades. I think now it's an expanding field that may contribute to illuminate the origins of power asymmetries between genders in humans. To some extent, of course, very clearly, the patterns in humans are going to be more complex, especially with the added cultural layers, but potentially they're not entirely disconnected from what we see in other primates. And especially, I think, an interesting finding from our comparative analysis is that if we look at human traits with respect to the extent of sexual dimorphism, with respect to the flexibility in social organization and mating system, humans would probably fall in the category of in this middle green category, where patterns of male-female power are expected to be flexible and not strict. So here I have to thank many collaborators in the past and in the present, daily colleagues with whom I work in France and elsewhere, institutional support and funders, and you for your attention. I hope it wasn't too long.
Okay, thanks very much, Elise, for a fascinating talk. I think one home message for the younger colleagues in the audience is, if you don't find in your PhD what you expect, by coming up with new questions, novel questions, and the right questions, you can still build up a very interesting and important scientific career. I'm going to stop the screen sharing now. So we're coming to the question session. That works like always. If you have a question, then please type a question mark into the chat. If you're a student, you can put an S behind it. We will treat students preferably, so you have priority with asking your questions. For the people on YouTube, Lauren is monitoring the YouTube channel. You can put questions there into the chat, and he would bring it into the Zoom. And if I call you up that it's your time to ask a question, please first introduce yourself quickly, say what's your name, where you're coming from and what you're studying before you ask your question. And we are starting with Eduardo, please.
Thank you, Karsten. Eduardo Fernandez Duque, Yale University. Thank you, Liz, for a wonderful talk. Where are you? Okay, I was trying to find your image on the screen. I want to say, I mean, Karsten was making a reference to our younger colleagues. I think it's fantastic the range of experience you've gathered as you moved from birds to meerkats to mouse lemurs, now the baboons. That's something else that sometimes we get committed to one single taxon from the go. Another time, there are different ways of reaching the repertoire of skills we get. I have so many questions, but I want to ask you one which I think is quite central, at least for the second part of the talk. If I took notes properly, you define intersexual power as asymmetries of reproductive holding power between males and females. So why create a new concept which you are defining as the difference? It's like if I were to say, I create a new concept for defining the difference in height between males and females. You're saying that intersexual power is the difference between some males and females in resource holding power. I have my hypothesis that these days intersexual power will catch more attention than resource holding power, but isn't it the same? I mean, you define it as the same.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, like, I would imagine, well, I mean, is like an operational definition. I think what's important is to be very clear on the definition of power, which is like resource holding power, which is definition that we've all used for years. And like then, like when it comes to male-female, is to intersexual power is a term to understand like power asymmetries. Potentially, so basically, what you're saying is like it would be better to say like intersexual power asymmetries. Is that right?
I
will basically asymmetries bit in the I think that's right.
An asymmetry is a difference.
Intersexual power asymmetries, yeah.
An asymmetry, I am thinking of the same as a difference. So the difference between males and females in resource holding power, now we call something else. We wouldn't do that with all other variables. I mean, we don't look at the difference between males and females in height and call it something else. It's just the difference in height. And the reason I get at this because I'm very thoughtful about somebody's going to pick up all this coming from the non-biology, non-science, and suddenly we have intersexual power and we never know where it goes, which of course it's out of our control. But why create a new concept when the definition is the difference between males and females in a concept we've already had, which gives us a very broad comparative framework to discuss it?
Now, I think the goal was not to create new concepts. The goal was just to apply existing concepts to understand male-female power asymmetries. So basically, would you be happy with like calling it male-female, well, intersexual power asymmetries or intersexual power differences? Is your,
I'm just not understanding. You're defining it as that. I mean, that's why if I took the notes right, I mean, you literally said intersexual power is asymmetries between males and females on resource holding power.
Yeah,
therefore,
no, I think
it's not a new concept. It's a difference between something we've used all along.
No, so sorry, perhaps my slide was misleading. Intersexual power is trying to understand contrast in power between males and females. Does it make you happy? Do you find it clear?
I'm trying to understand.
I mean, do you find it clearer?
I mean, and I was surprised because, I mean, if anyone, Peter has been, and we liked it, I mean, he's helped us so much with really trying to be precise on the definitions of social structure and mating system and bonds. So here I'm seeing that I was getting confused, but now I'm.
No. I think it's a fair comment. I think it's a fair comment. It should be again. I think power was clearly defined, and intersexual power, like the way we use it usually, is to specify that we are interested in the contrast in power between males and females. So probably intersexual power should not be shortened like that, and it should be intersexual power asymmetry. Oh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for that. Like, I think I'm not the best one to be extremely rigorous with terminology, to be honest. So I'm always grateful for people challenging me on that. Because I'm more interested in the big question and tend to do shortcuts sometimes that are not suitable. I totally agree.
Very interesting talk. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Elise that she really defined everything very clearly, and there's some differences in languages, and yeah. Then we come to a question by Christina Lorenzi, please.
Here I am. My name is Cristina Lorenzi. I work in Paris, Sorbonne Paris Nord. I work on hermaphroditic organisms, not hermaphrodites, but which seems very far from what you do. But at the end, there's a war between sexes, even in hermaphroditic organisms. I was interested in what you mentioned, but then you decided not to go into, which is the topic about countermeasures at the moment when female choice is not that, how to say, cannot be exhibited by females. And so, for example, I was wondering, the hidden fertility, is it possible that this is something that is more common than we actually know? Because I think this is one of the sort of easiest way to manipulate male power and male decision at the moment when you make your choice as a female.
So so do you mean are there more species where females hide fertility than we know of? Yeah, I think it's a challenging question to answer. It's certainly concealed ovulation and concealed fertility, I think, is a very relevant trait to female reproductive control. So it's a good point. I think it's a very challenging trait to demonstrate because many species advertise with olfactory signals. So I mean what is relatively easy to see is visual signals or the lack of visual signals, but when it comes to olfactory cues, it's much more challenging to ensure that there are no olfactory cues that can be detected by males. And I think especially for this reason, it's a particularly challenging trait to study comparatively. Because for example, it's tempting in primates to classify those species with the big swelling as baboons, as advertising fertility, and species lacking these swellings to have hidden fertility, but I think it would not be accurate. It just reflects different sensory modalities in different taxa. For example, lemurs are very olfactory driven and live in an olfactory world, whereas catarrhines, baboons live in a more visual world. So it's a bit difficult to quantify that. And I think on top of it, there's an extra layer of complexity with respect to female reproductive control, which is that these fertility signals these visual signals that are very obvious, the more we study them and the more we know about them and the more we realize that they can be extremely manipulative. So in some species, they seem to be quite reliable indicator of ovulation, and that seems to be the case, for example, in chacma baboons and in chimpanzees. But in some other species, it looks like these signals are not reliable indicators of ovulation, and that seems to be the case, for example, in bonobos, where those swelling lasts nearly permanently, and they're not necessarily much bigger when females ovulate. Or there are other species where species have these swellings when they're actually pregnant and clearly infertile. So that means that, yeah, it's quite challenging to study. And I think it's really I think each species can differ because it's the evolutionary arms race between males and females that drive this manipulation from females. And so I think at the moment, we don't have the data for most species to know whether they're manipulative or not. So it's quite difficult to work on it on a comparative level. But I think they're really interesting and potentially an important strategy for females to manipulate information about fertility. And actually, just to go even beyond that, I suspect the contrast between female chimps and female bonobos in the reliability of the signal might be one key explanatory factor for the contrast in male-female power relationships, for the fact that bonobo females are very often socially dominant over males, while chimpanzee females are never socially dominant over male chimpanzees.
Okay, then we come to a question by Filippo.
Hi, this is Filippo Aureli from Universidad Veracruzana in Mexico. And I really enjoyed your talk, Elize. It was very nice and very comprehensive and so on. And I've been, for many years, I studied several species of macaques and chimpanzees, so I fit very nicely with the majority of things you said. For the last 20 years, I studied a species in which is in the middle of instead of your category. They are not one type or not another. And I wonder, and I think it's, I say, now a few things I'm saying about this species may be different in the similar in some related species. These are spider monkeys, so they may be different in different species. This is one of the aspects that we may believe there are differences between species of spider monkeys. And then Tony Di Fiore is here, so I think he can chip in on another aspect because I'm not sure. But I mean, I'm talking more about the general case. The moving from your first part of your talk to the second part of the talk was important, of course, but I think you carry out one aspect especially from the first part. One of the three concepts from Barbara Smart, one of the 3 points, is the fact that there is a directionality in the aggression, so dominance, right? The fact that there is or not a cost in the aggression, that was actually lost in the second part because it's difficult to measure it on a large base of data. No? So the dominance, it seems that for the second part was mostly on the win of the aggression, and then since if there is a bias in the who's winning, then is one of the two sides are dominant. But let's say that there's a aggression that actually doesn't have a cost. Okay, that is the key of the harassment part. Okay, and actually is done in a way that looks like more like a display. Yeah. How that, that is clearly doesn't fit the harassment part, but then how that type of aggression can be actually used for doing the dominance of the second part of the talk. So that's I think is a little my gray area in that part. Mostly looking at baboons, macaques, chimpanzees, I would not have any problem. But spider monkeys, the vast majority of aggression that males do versus females are of this type. Is a big chase the males do. There's a difference between species, maybe. Big chase, they do it. Female screams, the male never touch it. Okay? And then sometimes they actually go and mate. And we believe that actually we don't have proof, there is a nice area of investigation, that is actually much more a way of males showing their strength and female then choose. That's a clearly female choice in the species is not much, which at least in the species that I study. So if there is an aggression, that has this type of function, they use aggression pattern, so there is an aggression, but there's no direct cost on the female apart from the energy, but there's no physical cost and so on. It's very focused during the female's cycling period, although there's no signal, so it's difficult for us to judge. And then, and sometimes there is actually the two of them go away from the group and copulate. There's no males harassing the females to do that. That type of aggression, apart from the issue that possibly is not sexual harassment, the behavior, if there is not a cost. But the second part is that that aggression will actually fit to make it the dominance part of the second part of the talk or not? That is my question for you, most.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think that's a very good question, actually. I mean, it helps to touch on the challenges of comparative analysis when it comes to complex behavioral patterns that can be quite different across species. So I'm not sure I have really an answer for your particular spider monkey case, actually. I mean, South American monkeys are what I'm least familiar with, and like I think they look fascinating, and I think they're particularly interesting in the context of understanding male-female power relationship, because all those species in the middle, I think, will be most informative, because that's really where you can go to understand the ecology of male-female relationships. They have been sometimes challenging to incorporate in the comparative analysis, because as far as we understood from the literature, in some cases, like there are, well, some species are characterized by no agonistic interaction between males and females. So in which case, well, then like it's, you can't really measure what happens. So what you describe is, so we concluded from that there's no sex bias, but like it's obviously a bit of a bold conclusion, perhaps, if there are no agonistic interactions. Now, what you're saying of the spider monkeys, so like, is a bit more complex than that, because actually, I mean, what I understand from, there's another case that is complex, is when the agonistic interaction, there's no clear winner or no clear loser. So in the case where a winner or a loser cannot be clearly identified, then it won't fit into our measure. Clearly, we only measure what we can measure, like in the second part of the talk. So it will omit a number of interactions that are potentially interesting, but can't be like really integrated in the analysis. In the case that you describe, I understand that there might be a winner, which is the male. Would you say there's a winner in what you describe, or?
Yeah. No. It's clearly a winner because the females goes away and escapes. Okay. So by looking at as a typical aggression, you're going to do the males abdominal the females. Also, okay. It's never expressed in any other context, obviously. No.
So I think like my intuition about it would be to say that there's no aggression with a clear winner that has no cost. So there might be aggression with a clear winner that have no physical costs, like no, for example, injury. But I think it will always have the stress costs, for example. As far as I know of spider monkeys, for example, there's infanticide by males, right? No, I mean,
there are a few cases, yeah. But it's not the most typical things, because they are female philopatry, so that's basically a, and then
but
the
it's
data
just
from
to say, if there are a few cases, it means it's a potential threats. I think in this context, I don't know if it's about infanticide. It's just an example to say, well, perhaps sure. Like male-female relationships in spider monkeys, like don't look as peaceful and benign as what you initially put it. And I suspect in such a system, like any aggressive interaction to a female can be stressful and can like really work on like at least intimidation in the long term. So I mean, you know better than me, because I'm really not a specialist of spider monkeys, but there's also like in the context of all the aggressive interactions, like all these winner-loser effects that have been described, which suggest that any loss, even if it has no physical cost, no injury, not that much stress involved, for example, will undermine self-confidence and confidence in self-confidence for future agonistic encounters. And I think that is a clear cost in social interactions. And so I would be a bit worried about I would be a bit skeptical about like the no cost. And so I suspect these interactions would probably fit in the as long as there's a clear winner and a clear loser, they would be integrated in the analysis. That's the technical answer. And the more biological answer would be, I suspect even if like there's no clear stress or clear injury, I mean, I think they're probably costly to females.
Let's say, okay, I agree with you, but let's say that we know now that this aggression done in this way is very useful for the female to decide with whom to mate. And there's basically outside this period, there's almost no aggression, okay? So under those circumstances, how would you? So actually it's useful to have the aggression for the female, because she will choose the best male based on whatever she wants. So,
well, I believe you that it's useful and that she will.
No. I just no. This it was more like I push it a little bit. We are not sure about it. We suspect and so on. But let's say that because it's possible there is this type of situation in which you have let's say in a way, we know with the chimpanzee, I don't want to stop it because otherwise it's going to be too long. Chimpanzees, sometimes they do this big display and they display around and they make a lot of noise, okay? And they sometimes beat anybody else, maybe a female, but they don't, at the end, the female choose to mate with the male because it's stronger and so on. No, potentially. Okay, you could imagine that, okay? Because it's
they mate with them. They quite often mate with them, whether they choose to do it. Like I
know, but that is with the sparring monkeys. Let's say it's very likely that that's the case instead. Okay.
Yeah. No. I think yeah, it's very likely that okay, I have no problem with the idea that male behavior is both indicator of used in a male choice context because it's indicator of a male condition, blah blah blah, and also a form of sexual coercion that can be costly to the female. I think it's not.
I think could go together.
Yeah, I don't think that.
But that means that's a female
would necessarily
choice.
be exclusive. I think it can be both. I don't see why it should be mutually exclusive. If that helps.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, with this, we move forward to the first student question by Lindelani.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Elise, for the wonderful talk. So my name is Lindelani Makoya, and I'm a PhD student at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, working on the costs and benefits of solitary living using the bush coral red as a model species. I'm currently doing work in Springbok at the Cyclone Canoe Research Station. So my question is, there was one of the slides where you were showing the female that always had an injury because of the male due to the male aggression, and this injury was always caused whenever she was cycling. So when she wasn't, she would heal, and then when she cycles again, the male will reopen the wound. So my question is, do females have strategies where they try and mitigate or avoid getting this sort of injuries from the males by sort of, I don't know, reducing their reproduction or not cycling, or phrase it differently? Do females have strategies to try and avoid this male aggression so that it's not such a huge cost to their physical bodies?
Coming non-cycling.
It's a very good question. I think the truth is so basically from the point where they're fertile and cycling, especially in the system that I described in these Soubise baboons, where the environment, everything is so visible and it's very difficult for them to hide from male. If a male starts to follow them everywhere and to monopolize them, I think there's not much they can do to avoid it. I mean, of course, when males become aggressive, they try to escape, but quite often they can't. Sometimes they can. There's this typical, a very typical behavioral sequence at Soubise, and I think more generally probably in Chacma baboons, is like a male starting to chase a female. The female will, in fear, will escape in a tree. And then she will climb up and up the tree. And the male will climb up and up the tree again. And it looks nearly like they're playing theater because it's so commonly reproduced. And then the female will be at the very bottom of at the very end of the branch of the tree. And the male will keep them there for a time that looks really long. It looks like males are really playing with that. Where the female can either jump, but it's quite high, or either stay. And eventually, quite often, they jump, and sometimes they really injure themselves. We've seen pregnant females aborting from those interactions. So it's quite, just to illustrate the fact that it's quite hard for females to escape. And when they escape, sometimes it's even worse. Then with respect to potential physiological strategies, we've tested in a recent study whether they could shorten their sexual receptivity and their swollen periods, potentially to decrease these costs. And we couldn't find any effect of, for example, the number of males or periods where there are more males or there's more male instability, which usually are those periods where there's more sexual coercion. There was no effect on the length of sexual swellings. So for now, it looks like females are, there are more complex patterns influencing the length of sexual receptivity. For example, females need to mate with several males to confuse paternity, because there's lots of infanticide in these species. But to cut a long story short, I think Chacma baboons are pretty much like one of the worst system when it comes to, you know, male-female power relationships, like a system where males are strictly dominant over females, where females are, I mean, it's pretty stuck. I mean, it's quite hard for them to escape male aggression. I think they illustrate like really much the end of the spectrum in terms of like male-female coercion. There's also lots of infanticide by males, and so yeah, like not good to be a baboon female, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Of course, inflammation can be energetically very costly, and in humans, it's known that chronic inflammation can lead to women stop to cycle, but it would not be a strategy to avoid male aggression, but would be a trade-off. My question is related to what Christina, who just had to leave, was asking, and is, I think, the second or third question coming out of your PhD, which you could not address here. With all these sexual coercion by males, why do female baboons advertise their reproductive status? And I mean, this advertisement is also energetically costly, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that really links to the conversation we just had. It looks like patterns of swellings, so which species produce like these big swellings across primate species is linked with the presence of male infanticides. So the production of these swellings are well, basically, I think like it's a hypothesis, but it's relatively well supported by comparative analysis. Is like whenever there's like a threat of infanticide by males, females need to be sexually promiscuous to confuse paternity, and in order to do that, like they tend to extend their receptivity period so they can mate with more males.
Okay, thank you. Then a question by Clara. Nice to see you again, Clara.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. I'm Clara B. Jones, social evolution, retired. I want to ask just two clarifying questions to be certain that I'm on your page. First of all, let's see, First of all, in all of your discussion about quote unquote power, are by males, by females, are we agreeing that these behaviors between the sexes are reproductive strategies?
Not necessarily strictly. So like in the second part of the talk, I really talked about like the social rank of females relatively to males. And for the comparative analysis, we looked at agonistic interactions, all sorts of any agonistic interaction that was recorded between males and females. So in these agonistic interactions, some might relate to reproduction, but some might relate to food or to other contexts. So these patterns are not strictly related to reproduction.
Okay, great. Just a second question. When you look at variation, are you aggregating across divisions, catarrhines, platyrrhines, and strepsirrhine? Are you looking across divisions and aggregating those data, or are you looking within divisions?
By divisions, you mean platyrrhines, strepsirrhines,
Yes.
and catarrhines?
And catarrhines and yes, platyrrhines.
No, we look across.
Are you looking across all of the species within those divisions, or are you looking division by division?
No, across. across all these divisions.
So if you are aggregating the data, do you think that you would get different patterns if you looked within rather than across the divisions?
I think, yes, it's likely for some of the relationships, just because, I mean, basically, like we actually have run all the analysis also only within lemurs, and also excluding lemurs from the data sets. So in order to check that it was not all driven by the difference between lemurs and the others. Problem is, like, quickly we run out of power. Within division analysis would be really limited by statistical power. So necessarily then we find not the same results, just because we don't have the same statistical power to draw from. But on top of that, for some of this relationship, yes, for sure, the results will be affected by looking within division, because sometimes, like, not all, depending on the traits we are looking at, not all the variation is represented within a certain division. So, but for example, for the hypothesis that's best supported, like the female competition hypothesis, most of the results I showed today, like, I don't remember exactly, but the most salient results are actually replicated within lemurs. So some of these results are really robust to within division analysis, in answer to your question.
Okay, good. Just a final comment, and then I'm done. I think that you could get a handle on female reproductive success if you looked at interbirth intervals between or within a given female across females. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, whatever interactions are going on that you are terming power should have an effect on female reproductive traits or characteristics or outcomes. And one way to do that for females, since you don't have the genetic data for males or females to look at fitness, one way in females to do that is to look at interbirth intervals. Do you think that is operational or maybe a good idea?
Are you talking about the first part on sexual coercion and the fitness costs of sexual coercion? Yes, I think, like, female reproductive success generally, and any proxy for female reproductive success would be an interesting measure to look at. We haven't done yet. At the moment, we're investigating the fitness consequences for males, and they look important like that. But we haven't yet looked at the costs of coercion for females. But yes, I think that's a very good suggestion. That's very relevant, and I think that would be that is what we need to do to better understand the fitness costs for both sexes. So yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we have a question by Annemarie, and I take the opportunity to point out her very nice review that was published this week on female multiple mating and annual litter numbers and test size in terrestrial mammals. I'm just mentioning this because I really liked reading this review this week. So Annemarie, your question.
Thank you, Karsten, for promoting the paper. My name is Annemarie, and I'm a postdoc at Universidad Católica de Chile. And my question is kind of related to, or not related, but it came up during your answer for Felipe's question with the ties in the fights. Do you have kind of an idea of when that occurs? Is it, for example, when a fight, the duration is just too long? Maybe the individuals are close to each other in rank when there are ties occurring, or yeah, do you have kind of like an idea of like when that occurs?
So what you call ties is like when there's no loser and no winner?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I mean, like, so apparently it's not the easiest question from my baboonologist perspective, because like that doesn't happen in baboons. But talking to colleagues, it's apparently very common in some species, and it was like a very common discussion we had like with Peter Kappeler when running this analysis. It seems to be quite common in lemurs, for example. I know that colleagues in spotted hyenas also mention that sometimes there's an interaction that's clearly agonistic, but it's impossible to say whether who won it. So that's I think in my knowledge, it's probably like the fact that they occur is probably more species dependent, like species dependent. Obviously, there are other explanatory factors, but for example, like baboon societies are extremely despotic. And I suspect, like in more egalitarian societies, these interactions with no clear winner are more frequent. But in baboons, like the dominant will like always win an interaction. But there are systems where it's not always the case, where dominant win most interactions, otherwise they would not be classified as dominants. But where there are like a fair number of interactions that aren't clearly, the outcome isn't clear. And so I think these are, yeah, I think these are quite, that underlines one limitation of this big comparative analysis, that in order to build this data set, one has to ignore many complexities in the social interactions that probably have their importance, including this, for example, this percentage of interactions that are undefined, like undetermined, which it's quite likely that it correlates with some other aspect of the study system, and that would be very interesting to look at. And that, yeah, it's not just like an uninteresting part of variation. I think it probably, like the percentage, the frequency at which they occur probably tells a lot about the dynamics of like social interactions in a given system.
Thank you. Also, great talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, from what I see, that was the last question, if I did not overlook anyone. So I would like to thank again Elise for really a fascinating talk, and also a very broad talk with from the individual studies to the comparative studies. I would like to point out the talk we'll have next week, defined by Dominic Defner, on social decision-making in human collectives. And yeah, I would like to thank everyone for contributing to today's find. It was a nice discussion, a fascinating talk, and at least I learned a lot and I liked it. And I'm going to stop now the live screen.